Okay, welcome to Principles of Microeconomics. Here we're going to go through an overview of kind of what's expected in the course and a few broad concepts, overview concepts within Principles of Microeconomics. Also a little bit about how to handle watching these videos and what you should be doing when you watch the videos in order to maximize your potential for success and what you get out of the course. The first thing we'll say for this course, and at least for my online videos, I don't know exactly how other people demand, but I'm taking notes. This is an exception, right, because we're kind of doing the overview, but as a general rule, anything you see in the PowerPoint slides and that's on the board, I'll be writing on the whiteboard that's behind me often throughout the course, or on a little electronic pad that just shows up on the screen. What you see there, you will want in your notes. So you will want to have a notebook next to you where you are writing down things as I go through them, where you're taking notes much like you would in a traditional online class. And literally everything that's put on the PowerPoints or on the board, you will want in your notes, right? I'm trying to do my best to summarize what I think are the most important things in the books, or the best outline of the book where I think you'll have a good chance for success. So you'll want that. You will want to have it all written down. Once again, the exception is if I explicitly state you don't have to take notes on a particular slide or topic, then of course you don't have to do it. I say this is a tough class. I say it's not for wimps. The Principles of Economics courses are tough for a lot of people. If economics was easy, more people would do it, more people would understand it, but there's a lot of details in this class. There's a lot of details within economics. There's a lot to understand. These problems aren't easy. I mean, if you read the news stories about the economy, they're not easy stories. And often political leaders and other leaders will completely misunderstand a particular point. It's because these aren't necessarily easy topics, right? I mean, they're very important, but this isn't going to be what I would think of as an easy class. But if you take good notes, study, every chance in the world you should succeed. And I say here, note the special points. I put the preschool graduation of my son Zeke. You'll notice the little bullet point picture of him on the last one. Oftentimes, if there's like a general concept that you really should know, I'll put the little picture by him, or the little picture of Ezekiel next to the point. He's in his little graduation cap. The idea that you really want to know this in order to graduate from the class. So note the special points. Those are, you'll want to make some indication that perhaps that's a point you really want to make sure you know, both for your general knowledge in life and for the course. So what is economics? For those who haven't had it, I mean, social science, it's more rigorous and mathematical than the other social sciences. There's a little bit, you'll see more math in most economics classes than you would, say, psychology or sociology, political science usually. However, usually it's less structured, less math, a little bit more on the social side than the hard or the natural sciences, right? I mean, at least in the undergrad level, you're going to see less math here than in a physics major, or the introductory physics courses where they could be heavily calculus. In this class, there's no calculus in this class. This is the introductory level. We don't deal in calculus in Principles of Microeconomics. So there's a little bit less math structure than some of the natural sciences, but compared to the social science, it's a bit more structured. The goal is the same as other social sciences. It's to gain a scientific inference into social problems, right? We want to understand what's going on with the money supply, or why are so many teenagers unemployed right now? What could explain it? Well, it turns out Principles of Microeconomics gives you some really good insight into why this might be happening, why that specific group might be having so many problems with the unemployment rate. Unemployment rate among teenagers is more than double the the general population. Right? We can get insight into these problems using our economic analysis and into a host of other problems. Why are incomes unequal? What factors might lead to discrimination? Why is it better to have multiple firms than one firm in a market, all else equal? A lot of issues we can get through. And we look at this as a structured, scientific inference into why these are happening. So you'll often, if you watch a presidential campaign or a political campaign, or if you even just hear economists discuss issues, you might get the idea that economists disagree on a whole lot on everything. And on the frontiers of economics, there's certainly disagreement, but that's actually the same as the frontiers of any science. There's disagreement on what might be happening. On a lot of issues, and especially on really almost everything we go through this course, economists are in overwhelming agreement. So this is a poll, these are survey questions, and quite honestly, any poll where there's not money tied to it, you're never going to get 100%, right? You're going to get some goofballs who are going to say the wrong thing just to be goofballs. So these ones that are, these top, what are we looking at here? The top 11, 12, or 85%, 84%. That's close to basically saying every economist says this. So a ceiling on rents reduces the quantity and quality of housing available. So rent control reduces the quantity and quality of housing available. This is an issue we'll study here. Some of these are macro issues, like 2, 3, 4. 5 is a little bit more of a macro issue, so is 6. 7 is a little bit more of a microeconomics issue, although it's kind of both. The United States should eliminate agricultural subsidies. 85% of economists agree with that statement, which basically saying economists think the Farm Bill should not exist. Local and state governments should not subsidize professional sports franchises. A lot of places do. A lot of places subsidize building a stadium. There's other issues with macroeconomics. 14, the redistribution of income in the United States is a legitimate role for government. We're starting to get a little bit lower here, 83%. The United States should not ban genetically modified crops. There are some who think they should be banned. 82% of economists disagree. 17, the minimum wage increases unemployment among young and unskilled workers, 79%. The overwhelming majority think this. When we just talked about this issue throughout the course, we will see why that happens. So economists, while you hear disagreements, those are more on the frontiers of the field. And even here, you still have some disagreement. A lot of what we go through in the principles, everybody agrees on, especially in microeconomics. Microeconomics is more settled. What will go on, there's not much disagreement on. When we cover our demand and supply and how does a demand shift affect the equilibrium, everybody agrees that happens. So what we cover isn't very controversial, but these are the tools you'll need. If you wanted to get into a debate on some of these, you need these basic principles tools in order to get into this debate and make an educated argument. So, continuing. Economic analysis, there's two branches, as you probably know, microeconomics versus macroeconomics. We'll put in here a couple different examples. Should a business expand or should the federal government increase interest rates? The first is a microeconomic problem, and we'll in fact be talking about cases like this. The second, though, is more of a macroeconomic problem. Should the federal government increase interest rates? That's not covered in this specific course. It's not covered in the Principles of Microeconomics. So what distinguishes microeconomics from macroeconomics? Microeconomics deals with individual and firm decisions. So these are non-aggregated decisions. Macroeconomics is often more the economy. In macroeconomics, things are usually aggregated. In macroeconomics, if you've heard of the unemployment rate, right, that's not the unemployment rate for teachers or the unemployment rate for people on Wall Street or the unemployment rate for truck drivers. That's the average unemployment rate in the whole country for every sector combined. And that's useful to know, right? So is the inflation rate. How much overall are prices going up? Microeconomics looks much more at specific sectors. By doing that, we actually can be a whole lot more precise within microeconomics. The decisions aren't aggregated. You can look specifically what's going to happen if a hurricane hits to the demand for pizza. Right? That's much more specific than a lot of the questions that you would get in macroeconomics, but very relevant, and you can get much more precise on these types of questions than perhaps on questions in macroeconomics. So the difference between micro and macro, that is, is noted with a point with, it's a Zeke point, as we'll call it. If the video is going, by the way, since this is the introductory, I'll mention this. If the video seems to be going faster than you can write, pause the video, just jot this stuff down. But once again, if you see a Zeke point especially, you'll want to make sure you know it. But really what we see here, the difference between micro versus macro, it's the kind of thing that is often tested. Like there will be a test question, what's an issue dealt with in microeconomics? And you'll have to know. So overall, microeconomics, what are some of the topics we're going to be covering in this course? I love this course. I think this is a great course. We just cover some fun stuff. Supply and demand is kind of the basic building block of economics. We spent a fair amount of time on that. Related to that's pricing decisions, how the number of firms affects prices, game theory, labor economics and discrimination, environmental economics. We cover poverty and inequality and issues. We even cover a little bit of sports economics and libertarian economics in the end. It's just a whole host of issues, a lot of which you might not have even thought that we would be covering in our Principles of Microeconomics course, but the tools of microeconomics applies and allows us to get really good insights into a whole lot of very interesting issues. Now, in this course, we're going to be using a lot of models, especially in the principles class. It's a lot of graphs. There's some equations as well, but a whole lot of graphs mainly to get predictions. Note the models, they're going to make some assumptions on behavior. Most of the time they're pretty realistic, but one thing, if times there's an assumption that's not, usually we just kind of go with the assumption to start with, and then we can talk about, well, what happens if this assumption's really wrong? What might be different? There's several times in the course we're going to be doing that. We're going to, okay, let's start with these assumptions, and then we find some insight. And we say, okay, we had these assumptions. What happens if we peel those assumptions back? Obviously, I'm teaching the course, so I think this is useful, but the reason, I'm biased, right? But the reason we do this is the models can help you get a lot of insight. Even though they simplify some things and it's not perfectly real life, they still can help you get a lot of insight into various relationships that occur. Between pricing, between when would we expect various things to happen, with firms, with consumers. These models certainly aren't real life, but they capture enough of the behaviors that you would expect to see that they can usually give you some really good insight into causes and effects that you will see in the real world when there are these assumptions that seem a bit rough or we usually do spend some time to peel back the idea of this and to say, well, okay, is this really a valid assumption, or what happens if that doesn't hold? In this class, we will be mostly doing positive economic analysis. Positive economic analysis is analyzing things that are verifiable. So in ways, Principles of Microeconomics should not be really a controversial course at all. We are looking at what is happening, not what should be done about something. Positive economics, it's an analysis of statements that are verifiable. So demand and supply issues, we're going to be looking at, okay, what happens in this particular market? So we'll say if-then statements are also positive. If the demand for the PlayStation 3 increases, how will that affect the demand? How will that affect the pricing for the Wii U? Or if the price for or opposite, if the price for the PlayStation 3 increases, how will that affect the demand for the Wii U? Right? If-then statement, that's positive analysis. One note, we could actually be wrong and it's still positive analysis. Like you could make false statements. As long as you're making a statement that's verifiable, it's considered positive analysis or positive economics. Normative economics, which I think is important, right? The idea of value judgments or what should be done, it's important, but it's not covered as much in this class, right? Normative statements talk about what should be or what is. So in Principles of Microeconomics, we spend our time figuring out what is happening. Positive statements, that's what they describe. Normative statements often will describe what ought to be or what should be going on. In terms of what's more important to study, you usually need to get the positive down first, right? You need to know what is happening before you can have a debate on what ought to be. If you think the government should be taking some particular action on the minimum wage or tax rates or whatever action that is, the first thing you really want to know is the positive analysis. What is happening? Or if you do something, what then will happen? Right? The thing about microeconomics, though, is that's what we're going to be doing in the course. If you do something, then what will happen? We do not usually take the next leap. Or I should maybe caution this. On your exams, we will not take the next leap. Or in your homeworks, we will not be taking the leap to say, what ought we do? The reason is that involves value judgments, right? When we go through the analysis for minimum wage or tax rates or any host of issues, I'll have my views based on our positive analysis of what we should do. They're not really relevant. There might be time to time I'll mention that. Anytime I mention my normative position, though, I'll usually preface this with saying, well, this isn't on the test because it's my normative view. I would expect of those watching the video and those in the class, we'll do some positive analysis, and then there's different opinions, right, on what we ought to do, because different people will take this analysis and then come to different conclusions on what we ought to do. So the tests in this class are on positive economic analysis, right? They are on what is happening. But I do encourage you to be thinking of the normative side as well, right? Let's applying this into the what ought we be doing, what ought to be. It's useful and it's valuable and it makes this more fun, in my opinion, is to take these issues and then to say, well, this law is being proposed and I don't think this is good because we should be doing something else. And then what you can take this class is the reason we should be doing something else is we find this happens if you do X, Y, and Z. So positive versus normative, it's an important distinction. Our class is mostly positive analysis, but I hope you think on the normative. I hope you keep in mind your views on what ought to be while you're going through this.